My name is Margie Coggins, and I serve as the chair of the Lawrence Public Library Foundation Board. We have just a few housekeeping things at every event, I think the same ones. Please silence or turn off your cell phones. You also notice that there's a little card, an index card on your seats. If you have a question for our Q&A period, would you put your question on that little card and hand it off to the ushers? Also, please note that on that little brochure that's on your seat, there's a listing of fabulous upcoming library events. Now that that's done, we're going to give them a minute to set up, and I will be back. And I won't need my flashlight. So I'm back because they're ready. So welcome. One of the real pleasures of serving on the foundation board is witnessing firsthand the generosity of this community. Many of you have stepped up with money and time to give to the Lawrence Public Library, and it makes an incredible difference. Tonight's program is a perfect example of the difference one family has made to this community and the library. Through the generous grant of the Harrison Family Fund at the Douglas County Community Foundation, we have this series, and it has made an incredible difference to us. Please join me in thanking the Harrison family for this grant. We would also like to thank Liberty Hall and the Eldridge Hotel for their support. Tonight's program, yeah, that's true, that's true. Tonight's program marks the launch of the new series, the 780 series. And for the library cataloging nerds in the audience, you know that that's the Dewey Decimal Range for music. But the series is really the brainchild of Brad Allen, our library director. Many of you know that he was in a band in his former life. And at my book club this week, one of the new young members said, "Did you know he was a punk rocker?" As a librarian and a musician, Brad is drawn to the stories behind the music. His dream was to bring some of the best musicians to Lawrence and share their stories with you. Tonight, that dream is coming true. We are delighted to welcome Booker T. Jones to Lawrence for the inaugural event of the 780 series. How fitting it is to have this music legend in this historic place. Booker T's life and music stand at the convergence of pop, rock, and soul. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1992. But Booker T's story extends beyond his instrumental hit, Green Onions, which we heard earlier. Booker T and the MGs were a band that played hundreds of songs from the Stax and Volt catalog, including hits by Otis Redding, Wilson Pickett, Sam and Dave, Rufus and Carla Thomas, and many others. Booker T's career spans 50 years in the music business, so he has a lot to talk about. So please help me, ladies and gentlemen, give a warm Lawrence, Kansas welcome to Booker T. Jones.
No? Oh, I think we're live.
Now, now we can hear. I'm fine, I have my phone. This is like my security blanket. I have a guitar tuner in here, actually, though. My wife made me buy this phone. I'm serious. I had a little one that was so nice and compact, fit in my pocket. I loved it. But now I have this big one, and I can see this one. Okay.
That's a good tuner. I want one of those. I like it. All right. So can you hear us all? Oh, can you hear us both all right? Could you thank Booker T. Jones for coming to Lawrence, Kansas one more time?
Thank you.
Margie put it really well. We're so excited to have you here tonight. And as we were driving in from the airport yesterday, we asked whether you had been here before, and in fact, you have.
I had, my recollection is that it was 50 years ago when I was here, and I flew from Indianapolis to Kansas City and drove and played with friends from Kansas City, Thomas Gadsden, and I think I brought the drummer Al Jackson from Memphis, Tennessee. That's as far as my recollection goes right now.
Well, welcome back.
Thank you, and thank you for coming. Thank you for having me, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I appreciate it.
Well, some of the main things that I wanted to talk about tonight were really to just for you to have a chance to tell stories about growing up in Memphis and your experience with Stax and many things you've done since your career at Stax in the 70s and on into the present. But I wanted to just start off talking about, you're a native Memphian. Tell us about that. Tell us about growing up in Memphis in the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
It turns out that being born in Memphis into the Memphis music community was something like being born into a unique family. And I recently ran into Charles Lloyd, who's now a famous jazz player, and he gave me a big hug backstage at the Monterey Jazz Festival, not Pop Festival. It was that Memphis thing. He was hugging me like a brother. And it's something that's lasted through the years, because I think we felt that by growing up in that community, we got something special. We're not really sure where it came from, but practically everybody who was born into the music community there in Memphis feels a camaraderie. And maybe it was being close to the river. I don't know how to define it, but it turned out to be a large legacy, and I'm proud to be a part of it. There was lots of music to consume for everybody on Beale Street. Beale Street was the street that led to the river and the riverboats. And a lot of people got to play, and I was one of them, on the boats, make a little money playing saxophone or piano on the boat. And it was just a very special heritage. The ones that went before us, W.C. Handy and composers like that just left such a beautiful legacy. And the teachers in the school systems and the support of the school system by the state and the government, the Memphis government, was just unequaled. There were instruments in the schools. There were instruments in the grammar schools. I was able to get my hands on an oboe at age 9 years old. And same went through the high school. I was able to get my hands on a string bass in high school. And all that was free. And it was that way throughout the city for black and white. So it was quite a place to be born if you wanted to be a musician.
No, it is just this town that is the center of music from the South. You know, everything comes to Memphis from the Delta or from wherever. And you were born there. I had thought about this before. Were your parents originally from Memphis, or where did they come from?
Yes.
If they were somewhere prior.
Because it was the major city between New Orleans and Chicago, notwithstanding St. Louis. The vein was for all the musicians from the Mississippi Delta, from Itabena on north, would be to go to Memphis. All those musicians came to Memphis. B.B. King, Elvis Presley, all of them that were born in that whole area came to Memphis to come to town. Basically, right. Memphis was town. Memphis was the big town. And that happened from Arkansas and from Tennessee, and it became a center.
Well, you mentioned this, we play Green Onions, and most people know you as an organist, as a piano player, but as you alluded to, even from the age of 9, you've dabbled in a lot of different instruments. What all instruments have you played and continue to play?
This started at about age 3 or 4, when I had a little tantrum in a 5 and dime store for a drum. 5 and dime store drum on Beale Street, and of course my mom resisted, but I was, persistent. Got the drum, and I think as soon as I got it in the house, I, busted a hole in it, So that required going back to the 5 and dime store and getting a tin drum with sticks, and I would beat on that thing. But the real thing was that my grandmother owned a piano, and she gave it to my mother, and my mother played. My grandmother played. My mother played Liszt, Bach. She played Debussy. She played Debussy, and so I grew up with that. And I would, on tiptoes with 2 fingers, try to play 2 notes on the piano up there. And so she sold it. Yeah. She sold it, and I guess I had another tantrum that was good enough that she was able to get the piano back. And so, the old big black piano. And I just was persistent with the drum, the piano, and before I was able to get the piano lessons, I convinced them to get me a little ukulele, a little uke. And it came with the diagrams of how to play the chords, taught myself to play the chords. I must have been 5, 6 years old. And so that's the precursor of this thing. That's why I ended up with one of these things, because these are the first 4 strings of the ukulele, and I fell in love with those first 4 strings. But yeah, I started at an early age and continued, and had a loving mother and father, supportive. In 9th grade, my father was able to take me downtown and do some type of 8 or 9 year contract to buy me a clarinet, a real clarinet. And I was 4th grade, 9 years old, and had one lesson, was able to afford one lesson, and taught myself to play that clarinet. But I couldn't make it into the band. All the seats were filled. I was too young, so I taught myself the oboe. And there was no one playing the oboe in the band. And I was able to get into the band playing that oboe with that little double reed.
It's hard. The oboe and the English horn.
You've been through it.
I haven't. I wouldn't even try it. I've heard a bad English horn player before. It's nothing anybody wants to hear.
Well, I was fortunate enough to be able to wrap the string around the reeds and get enough strength here in my jaws to play that thing as a little boy.
No, those double reeds are hard. I wouldn't even try. And I had read a story too, like speaking about the piano, then I've heard a story about you taking lessons, piano lessons, and that was really the first times that you saw an organ. Mm-hmm. Do you want to tell that story to folks a little bit?
Yes. It's kind of an enterprising young boy, I guess. 8 years old, I got a paper route. And, I was selling papers on the corner at first, Memphis World, and was able to get a paper route, and that afforded me to be able to pay for piano lessons. And my piano teacher had in her dining room, what I thought was a beautiful break front with china in it, beautiful wooden cabinet. And but there was a cute little girl sitting in there with a music waiting by this break front, and then I realized she was waiting for a lesson. So I asked Mrs. Cole, her name was Mrs. Elmertha Cole, and I asked her, what is that in there? And she said, oh, well, you don't want to know about that. You don't have enough money to do that. But she opened it up. It was a Hammond B3 organ, and just the sight of it affected me. Just the sight of it, the sight of the keys. I had seen organs before. There was an organ at the church. It was a pipe organ with with stops and so forth. But that was a big thing with
Did have the
pedals.
Leslie? Did she have the Leslie?
That was she had the Leslie speaker, and it looked like a brake front. So I was able to get organ lessons from an incredible teacher there in Memphis, Tennessee, who taught me how to crawl, how to hold the notes, gave me an appreciation of J.S. Bach. She was a Bach fan, and those were the first notes I played on the organ were Bach.
And so you have gone from the beginnings of classical training into pretty early on getting into the club scene in Memphis as a teenager, even prior to Stax, as I understand, a pretty in-demand player. Do you want to talk about some of the groups that you played with in the Memphis scene? Was that like late 50s, early 60s, or I'd like to hear more about that.
I think we're talking 1955 or 56 when I would get a few dollars for playing church teas. A church tea at 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. The women would like to have a little music as they socialized. So I started earning a little bit of money, and one particular tea I played was at Universal Life Insurance Company. And one of their agents was a saxophone player, a guy named Johnny London. He had a band that played for fraternity parties out at Memphis State, and so he hired me, I think at age 11 or 12, to play piano for his band as a result of what he heard at one of the teas. And I brought in some money that night. I think I brought about $5, which was, that was a good laugh, but that was a serious income for 1955 for a 2-hour engagement. That rivaled the money that my dad was making as a school teacher.
And
good.
No, it's
Pretty good.
it's pretty amazing. And then from there, continued to get work kind of in that scene. And then how so tell us about coming to and being involved with Stax Records. What is the impetus of how that all came about?
I wanted to expand the paper route. Had about 35 customers, but I wanted to throw for a bigger newspaper, Press Senator Evening or the Memphis or the Commercial Appeal. So I would solicit. I would look for new customers on my bicycle, and I kind of expanded the route from my boundaries over to the neighborhood was changing. Whites were moving out and blacks were moving in, and so I took my bike up on Macklemore Avenue, which was a little bit of different territory for me. Went a little bit further and saw a theater that was no longer abandoned, and the concessions area of the theater had a record store inside there, and they had 780's, 45's in the window, and you could walk in, and the guy there would play records for you. They had Ray Charles in there. They had Hank Williams. They had jazz records in there and blues. So I didn't get any customers on that first day, any new customers. I just left my bike outside this record store and was standing there listening to records. And the guy was very congenial and willing to play the records for me. His name was Steve Cropper. Steve Cropper was a high schooler from East Memphis. That was his part-time job, being a clerk at his friend's mother's record company. So standing there, it just became a daily ritual to go to that record company and listen to records after school before I threw my papers. And I started to hear music through how the theaters in those days had a curtain between the concessions area and the theater section. I started to hear music coming out, but it wasn't theater music. It was a band playing, and then I got that feeling again. Oh, that kind of touched me. Hearing the live music there and loving music the way I did. So I just went there every day for years and listened to the records. I developed a yearning actually to get through that curtain and be back there with those guys who were making that music.
How did you do that? 'Cause you did it. I think you did.
I didn't do it. It was it was luck. It was serendipity, or whatever you call it. By the time I was in 10th grade, I had taught myself to play saxophone and baritone saxophone, the big, heavy baritone saxophone. So it turns out that I was in class on one morning, 1960, and Satellite Records, which is the name of the company, was just having their first recording session on that morning. And someone in that session determined that they would like to have a baritone sax on a song. Well, there was no baritone saxophone player there, but who was there was a friend of mine named David Porter, who was an aspiring songwriter who had hung out across. He was a bag checker at the grocery store across the street. So he must have said, I know somebody who can play baritone sax. And so he rushed over to Booker T. Washington High School and devised some type of phony hall pass and probably told the teacher that somebody important in the school wanted to see me. Anyway, he got me out of class, run down to the band room and grabbed the baritone sax, borrowed the band director's car keys, ran out, threw the sax in the trunk. Well, it was a 59 Plymouth. It was a fast car. Zipped me over to Stax and whisked me through this curtain that I had wanted to go through for so long with my saxophone. And there, just like that, I was standing there in a recording session with a baritone saxophone, and they were asking me, well, do you have any ideas for this song? And they played a little bit of it, and I thought of this little thing that goes da ba 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 da 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 da, and it became the opening notes to "'Cause I Love You" by Rufus and Carla Thomas. So there I was, just like that. Yeah. Well, thank you. And I got paid, and I went back to school. I think I got $15. So I told them I could play piano before I left. Steve Cropper and Chips Moman. Chips was the engineer, and I think Cropper was the guitar player. I told them and so they called me back. They called me back, and I ended up going there every day after school and playing on various songs.
And then, so that kind of goes into the genesis of Booker T and the MGs. Mm-hmm. So, going from that and crossing that veil behind that curtain, and then, how do you go from what you just described into the formation of that group and the solidification of that being the house band? Like, what does that process look like?
Well, the situation was, the owner of Satellite Records was named Jim Stewart. His initial idea was to record some records and maybe make some money from the publishing, from the songs. And he got his sister to mortgage her house and buy some more instruments, and they began to try to start to have a record company over there. So they needed music, and they developed a house band consisting of people like me and some school teachers. Floyd Newman was a school teacher that worked after school, Al Jackson, and other drummers around. But they basically got a core group of people that kind of worked every day from about 4 or 5 to try to come up with musical ideas and make records. I became part of that group. I became one of the main keyboard players. A classmate of mine, a fellow named William Bell, had decided he wanted an organ on his song. You don't miss your water till your well runs dry. So they called me to play the organ on that song. And then made a dual discovery. Well, there's another Hammond organ in Memphis. There's one at the studio, Stax Records, not just at my piano teacher's house. So it wasn't the same type of Hammond. It was a smaller one. But I played the obligato part on William Bell's "You Don't Miss Your Water." I answered his vocals, and so continuing the job as house band, we would get called on the weekends to be available for some of these artists that Jim Stewart thought could be stars. Some of them were pretty good. Some of them weren't. Some of them didn't show up or just didn't work out. On one particular Sunday in 1962, the session didn't work out. I don't know why it didn't work out. Maybe the guy left. I guess some other people would have a better idea. But we ended up with an empty studio, and the four of us, the four session musicians, just sitting there with blank time for the rest of the Sunday. So Jim wanted us to use the time. So I ended up playing a blues, which ended up being called Behave Yourself. I was trying to imitate Ray Charles in the way he played blues on the Hammond organ. We played this blues, and Jim Stewart loved it. Everybody loved it. And recorded it, decided it should be a song that should be released. My advocate, I guess my best advocate there, was the drummer, Al Jackson Jr., and he said, well, the band should be called Booker T something. So they looked out the window, and Chips Moman had a little British Leyland car out there that he'd been doing wheelies out there, Booker T and the MGs. Oh yeah, that's it, Booker T and the MGs. So we had a band, we had a name, and we had a record. Well, we had half a record. We had the blues. We needed a B-side for the Behave Yourself song. And that's when we started playing a little song that I've been playing on piano, kind of an offshoot from my theory class. I was taking theory classes after school in preparation for going to Indiana University. And had started thinking about music in a different way once I started the theory classes. I started putting math to it and the relationships between the chords, and so I thought of some different combinations of chords, and the chords in Green Onions were an offshoot of that. Anyway, I ended up playing Green Onions on Hammond M3 organ, and they liked that one too. And that became the B-side for the first single of Booker T and the MGs. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And that one really took off as the B-side, which a lot of times may or may not really be played, as it's kind of the backside of the A that the DJs would be promoting. But I don't know, what do you think that it was that people heard in that song? I mean, I'm always fascinated at the magic of why a song hits and why another song doesn't hit, and when something is resonant and when it's not.
It was an accident. All the DJs were supposed to play what the record companies told them to play, the A side, and the DJs were playing Behave Yourself, which people liked, but this one particular guy, Ruben at WLOK, turned it over and started getting calls by playing the wrong side. Playing the wrong side. The wrong side was Green Onions. What was it? For one thing, it was the sound of that one speaker of that particular organ, the Hammond M3 organ, and the setting, the particular kind of clean, plain setting, with sound, the sound that was not filtered, not affected, and the attitude, I think, of the music. I had listened a lot as a younger man to Joe Dukes on organ. I had listened to, there were some amazing organ players coming through Memphis during that time. One was called Blind Oscar. He played at Club Handy and in a band upstairs, and I could listen. I was too young to get in, but I could listen from the street. And he was just amazing. His attitude was just so forceful, and the same with Joe Dukes. They they put force into the music. And I was trying to do that with Green Onions. And I think a lot of Memphis musicians took that attitude with their music. And so it was a moving experience to listen to it. I still like it.
It's good. I do too.
Thank you.
And like that song and other songs kind of in about 62 and then on into 63, when it just seems like when success hit Stax, it hit fast and it started to accelerate really, really quickly. What was that like, being the house band in this small record label that is suddenly getting all this national exposure and being distributed by Atlantic, and all these hits just start piling up? I mean, what was it like being there in that place with all of those players? Just
There were a lot of elements to that question. For me, it was being part of a family that had a creed and a musical code. Al Jackson was the drummer. Steve Cropper was the guitar player. Duck Dunn was the second bass player. Louis Steinberg was the first bass player. There were codes and creeds that we adhered to. One of them was, I don't know where they came up with this, but keeping the music simple became, you watch the playoffs and the coaches tell the guys how they're going to play the game. We had our coaches sort of like that, and it was keep it simple. Keep it funky, keep it accessible. Not too many flourishes, Keep it focused. Keep it so that you can feel it. And that was a law, basically. So some of this success stuff that you were talking about really was kind of inconsequential because we were so engrossed in each effort to make a song. And each one was its own, sometimes it took a day or two or maybe even a week. We were so engrossed in that we didn't think too much about whether it would be accepted or the outcome. It was all about the creation of the music, and there was actually a lot of joy and pleasure that went into it. And so it just became like a fraternity. It just became like a family. And that was the focus. And what we found was only ours. We didn't know that it would be heard around the world. That was not a consideration. So it was insular.
right. And we talked about this a little bit earlier this afternoon. Like I don't know how to put it. When what happens when money and fame and commerce starts to enter something that's artistic? What you described is something that sounds. That's what when I read the history of Stax, I understand it as that. It's just for the love of the music, and then this is a lot of times how musicians start out, and then money and fame, things start to come in, and what effect does that have? What effect did that have on Stax?
To be honest with you, the initial motivation was indeed was money.
So with Jim Stewart, and certainly.
It was. He was a banker, and that wasn't fun for him. He was a teller, and I guess a barber friend had told him, you could make probably an extra $200-300 if you had a song out and you had a publishing company. You could make some money, and there's talent here in this city. So he was out to do that. I think in the process he may have fallen in love with the music that he didn't expect to do, and his sister certainly fell in love with the music. I don't know if she expected that. So they were side effects. They were side effects of this initial money-making activity. But that was the initial, and of course, it was for everybody. Everybody wanted to make money. We didn't like the days when we didn't get checks. So,
Right. But again, like you're saying that when you start trying to second guess what somebody may or may not like, can start to have an effect on the process and creating something that is pleasing to you, rather than trying to make these assumptions or guesses as to what somebody might like and how you would craft a hit and what that would constitute, and that there could sometimes be something artificial about that. It seems like that certainly was not what was going on with the musicians who were working to create something.
Well, I said it was complex, and that is because there were a number of agendas that were being forged together there. Of course, my agenda was to improve myself as a musician and basically to pay my way through Indiana University and to learn. I had heard the orchestra, I had heard music in my own mind, and I wanted to be able to get that music out. I wanted to be able to write it down, and I could write well enough that I could, write a lead sheet for publishing, but I didn't know how to make textures, and I didn't know how to conduct, and there were many things that I needed to know that had to be taught.
Well, speaking of that, in addition to your work with Stax and the hits that Booker T and the MGs had, and being the band on so many records, in addition to all of that, you're also a very prolific songwriter. And I was wondering, just hearing you talk about really wanting to move that craft forward and going to school to really figure out more study and how to make that process more successful. Could you give us a sense of how you go about writing a song, or where you'd start and where it leads you, and how do you know when you're finished, and all that kind of stuff?
Those are good questions.
A good excuse to try to get you to play that guitar.
Most I think I am a person that is motivated by the opportunity. I know that when Albert King came to Stax, I was assigned the job of writing a song for him. I'd always loved blues before that. I was a big Jimmy Reed fan, loved B.B. King. But I would have never thought of writing a song for Albert King, although I loved his playing, because he played on this side. And so it's kind of like when the door opens, something creative happens inside me. And I think a lot of other songwriters are like that. So the night before the session, in my den, William Bell, my classmate, and myself came up with the idea for Born Under a Bad Sign. Because we had Albert King in the studio the next day, drove down from East St. Louis. And that was just such an opportunity. Born under a bad sign. I've been down since I began to crawl. Wasn't for bad luck, I wouldn't have no luck at all. Hard luck and trouble, my only friend. Been on my own ever since I was 10. Born under a bad sign. I've been down since I began to crawl. If it wasn't for bad luck, I wouldn't have no luck at all. Well, thank you. And I'll say that the song, this key that I'm playing is C sharp minor. Now, C sharp minor. Why wasn't it in C or A or E. Because I had some training about the emotional effects of different keys. And I knew that if we did this in C sharp minor, that it might be effective, especially with somebody with. So, you take something like the Moonlight Sonata, C sharp minor. So that's why I needed to be educated. I think things like that, nuances like that you can only learn from people who went before.
C sharp minor is a great chord. I like that one. I've been a fan of it.
Chopin.
Yeah, but it's true. Finding that, and I think, I think sometimes people like to think that being untrained, you can accidentally stumble upon something that somebody who is trained might not be able to. And I used to really embrace that when I was a kid, because that means you wouldn't have to practice, right? But then when you start to find out, it's true. It's like as you start to understand a process, you start to understand why something works the way that it does rather than being shocked at the moment that you accidentally stumble upon it, right? So that kind of foresight allows you to construct something like that in a much more precise kind of way. But it does have an effect. It sounds a lot better than A. A is all right, but A's good. What is some other magic that you've come up with on some of your other songs that you'd like to play? I was trying to be more articulate than that.
The whole Spanish magic of the guitar. The whole thing from Spain. I heard Andres Segovia play. So that infused, I think there must have been other African Americans, namely people like Curtis Mayfield, who were affected by the Spanish, the Romantic. The whole thing about being able to entice a woman with a guitar. And so, I was moved by the music of Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions, and the whole Jerry Butler, the whole Chicago thing, and the whole Spanish guitar thing. It's just the acoustic. And that, combined with the blues, and the people that I was with, and the inspiration I got from them, sitting with William Bell, such a fantastic songwriter, sitting with people like Otis Redding and David Porter, So I think some magic. I don't know how, but the magic comes all the way from Spain to the world through this instrument here. It came out in a lot of music that I was, I think, involved in. My situations with Bill Withers and the music that he made, and William Bell in particular. I'm thinking of one song in particular. Oh, can't play it, huh? whole gypsy woman feeling,
Yeah.
you know. Well, that's kind of magic for me. I still appreciate that. But I'll go back. Born Under a Bad Sign was written on keyboard. That was a piano. That was a piano in my den, an old piano. Music is just a magical thing. It's just a language that allows people to communicate without words or with words.
And so initially you did start with mainly composing on piano, and have you transitioned more into composing on guitar, or has it been arrange?
No, my most recent effort at composing was on piano in my living room. That may be my most comfortable place, is at the keyboard. It's something like having an orchestra at your disposition. You know, playing piano can be like that. At your disposal, rather.
What else do I? Oh, I am curious. I don't know. I kind of mentioned that at the end, but I don't know if there's a good answer for this. But how do you know when you're done with the song? You know, like I've seen people just get into the weeds and like never finish something, or try so hard to go too far and just kind of blow it and overproduce it. And it's like, I don't know. What do you think? Like when can you tell? Like that's the right amount of instruments. That's the right amount of tracks. That's the. I know there's no right answer, but
that's a very definitive question.
you seem to have gotten it right more than most people. So I was.
Well, thank you. When are you done? When are you finished? That's such a quandary. It's still a quandary that I work with consistently, because you can always add more, but it's something. It can be about freedom. You know, the coda to Time Is Tight. I think I must have worked on that for years, and I'm still working on it. And so on and so on. It just goes on and on and on. And I wrote this for the movie. Now, one reason it ended was because the movie ended.
Right.
I'm serious. We ran out of time. And then after we played that song, I added onto it. I don't know if any people have, if you've come to my shows, I usually play this song at the end of this show. And it's an extended version of Time Is Tight. Yeah. And it's a classical type inspiration that I got. And I recently wrote it for the Memphis Orchestra, and we end it on an F chord, and that's supposed to be the end. But I constantly get new ideas for it, and it's just a question of how much freedom do I allow myself with this piece of music, because it can be extended. Now, hopefully, we'll write it for other orchestras, and it'll have some of this additional music. So I guess it's the song that never ends.
Well, right. Well, there are some songs that are like that, right? Like there are some. I don't know if it's that they're more open. You know, some songs it seems like the box that it's in that's it. It has that box. And there are other songs that, whether it's the chords or the position of the chords against one another, that there's just way more that you could do with it. There's way more that you can embellish, that you can just continue to riff on the same thing.
Maybe in answer to the question, it would be your most honest answer to whether you're at a point of boredom.
Yeah. No, I've just seen it. Like I have a friend who he wrote these great songs, and then they just got so in the weeds of they just kept going, and then once they got done, they had done too much, and it became flat. It's sometimes you could try a little too hard, maybe.
That's a question we always ask ourselves in a lot of areas of life. When's enough? What? How much is enough?
A couple things that I did want to ask about Stax is, one of the things that is that people often talk about Stax, or that is historically important about Stax, is Booker and the MGs are obviously one of the very first integrated bands, and that the quote unquote blackest music in America was made by this integrated band, Booker T and the MGs. And to me, I'm just curious on it. A lot of people have said a lot of things about what this may or may not mean. I mean, guys who, when you go out on tour, can't even eat in the same restaurant together. I heard a great story of, I can't remember if it was Duck Dunn or Steve Cropper. There was a restaurant where they said everybody had to go to the back door, and so everybody decided to leave, and he went in and ordered like 40 hamburgers and waited for them to start cooking them and get the bags ready, and then left. That's one of my favorite stories of
Duck Dunn trick.
sticking it to
I don't know about that trick. But
But it makes me wonder, like, what is that something about Memphis? How did that happen? What does it say about Stax as a place, about the environment that people were working in, and what kind of camaraderie was that like?
It says that Jim Stewart was owner of his theater, and that was his domain, and he had the right to do in there what he felt, or whatever he wanted. He was a white man, and he had the right to do that. So he created an atmosphere that was conducive to us working together, and to forgetting about the whole racial thing inside there. So he did that. He didn't have any control outside of it, but he did inside. So it was inconspicuous. Nobody suspected that people were playing music together, blacks and whites, on Macklemore. Nobody ever suspected that would happen in Memphis. So he was, and even after the music came out, there was I think people wondered, well, where did this music come from? I think they thought it was a white band that was making the music, until they saw us, of course.
One other thing that I want to talk about, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier today, is, there's a definite, if you have studied the history of Stax, that it kind of has its early and its late. There's like early Stax, kind of 60 to 67, or 1959 to 67, I guess the discographies go as they're owned, and then 1968 to about 71. And really kind of the breaking point, I had mentioned earlier to you today, some of that is the tragic death of Otis Redding in late 1967, the bad business deal that went on with Warner Brothers buying Atlantic, but perhaps far more important than either of those is the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King at the Lorraine Motel, which was really the home away from home for Stax. And I know these are kind of, they're touchy things that I think a lot of times in the United States we don't really want to talk about that much, the significance of these things, but it seemed to have a profound effect on the psyche of Stax. Would you like to talk about that at all?
Yes, it had a profound effect on the psyche of Stax in particular. It was a unique thing. It was an interracial record company in Memphis, Tennessee, and Dr. King had visited to try to effect, I think he wanted to try to effect some type of change in the negotiations for the garbage workers. So the garbage workers were extremely close to the African American community. Well, they're actually, garbage workers are close to everybody in the world, but we don't realize that you can't live without the garbage being taken out. But they weren't able to survive. They weren't able to pay their bills, and we were seeing them on a daily basis, and they were getting hurt. The cans were breaking. It was just an awful, awful, awful situation. And so among us comes this person who, by some design, is a man among men, a man who has somehow transformed himself into a little bit bigger person than most of us were. So, and there he was on our territory in a place where Eddie Floyd, that room where he was shot, Eddie Floyd, were doing Knock on Wood. Right there, they wrote that in that room. That was our home away from home. And well, it was the only hotel where blacks could stay. So he was shot in our place. That was our, we supported the place. We had our meetings there. It was more than a slap in the face. It was a removal of a galvanizing force. It was an extraction of something that held a huge community together. And it happened on Stax territory. Now, for whatever reason, inconsequential, it did happen. And so when you get news like that, it's upsetting. It hits you here. And if you're a company, a group of people, it hits you there too. So what means do you have to recover from something like that? Or do you ever recover from something like that? So if there were any holes in the Stax boat, that's the type of thing that would open it up. If there were any fissures in the terrain, that's the type of thing that would make them come apart. And that's what happened. That's the only way I know how to put it. The things that were underneath the surface, the dysfunctional family type things that were in existence, which happens in every family. They were there in our family too. When something like that happens, those things come to the surface. It's unavoidable. So you must know that Stax was a dysfunctional family. Each family that has an impact on society is dysfunctional. Perfect families. Are you getting my point here? Mm-hmm. So we had our problems. And in 1968 is when the problems started to come out. We had different agendas. Some people wanted to make a lot of money. Some people wanted to make music. You see, and so it started to fall apart at the seams.
No, and it's just it's a horrible tragedy. I mean, you read, I mean, for purposes well beyond Stax, obviously too, but just to see that, that damage that it does, it's like there's this positive energy, just. It's amazing how fleeting that can be. You can be at the Monterey Pop Festival and this amazingly beatific experience, of Otis Redding connecting with all of these hippies and Booker T and the MGs being there and seeing California and this imagination of what the world could be like. And less than a year later, it collapses in tragic. I mean, it's horrendously tragic, and it's writ large, I think, in the story of Stax. And I don't know, it's just beyond a bummer. I don't know. Well, thank you for sharing that, as I think I'm just intrigued at how things can fall apart and how you can't really put them back together. And I guess on that, from what I understand, it wasn't that long after that you left Stax to move to Los Angeles. When did you head to Los Angeles?
Late 1968. I had seen a lot of Los Angeles, and as I said, one of the dysfunctional elements of Stax was that it was truly a great R&B company. We made R&B music, but there I was. I loved all kinds of music. I love jazz. I mean, I'm a real big jazz fan, and I wanted to play some jazz. California, I worked with Earl Klug. I loved country music. You like country music? I mean, come on. Seriously, you don't like country music. Well, I listened to Hank Williams. I listened to Kitty Wells, and I understood it. So in California, I met Willie Nelson on the beach, and I didn't have the restriction of someone saying, you can't go and play that music with them, and so California, California. Stephen Stills.
That's right.
Crosby, Stills, and Nash. So it just happened. I just left. I just left.
And what were some of the first people that you met, and some of the first musicians? Was Willie Nelson one of the? Was that at that time, or that was later? That was later down the.
Leon Russell and Herb Alpert. Leon Russell. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Herb was trying to start a record company, and he's like, "Come on over, Booker. We got this Charlie Chaplin place. We got this great studio. Come on over, man. Let's make some music." And Leon was playing on everybody's records, the Beach Boys, and he loved all kinds of music, and he was just a genius. And I would go up to his house, and he had this beautiful studio and this beautiful piano there, and people were always there, and it was a nice community out there, nice music community. Mm-hmm.
How did you get from there to? Was one of the first records that you produced when you were out there the first Bill Withers record? Was that? This was about 1970 or so, I think. So how did? Would you tell us that story of how that first producing gig came about and how that whole thing came to fruition?
Yes, I'd been working with some drummers, some new drummers, Jim Keltner and Jim Gordon, and I guess Gordon was working with Eric Clapton, and he was coming by the house and playing and introduced me to Stephen Stills, and so he was someone who was available to play on sessions. And I got this call from a guy named Clarence Avant. Clarence had sold Stax Records to Paramount. He'd made the deal, so I knew him. He was a business associate. And he found Bill Withers building airplane toilets in Inglewood and was impressed with Bill and wanted to get him into the business somehow. So he called me and said, "I'd like you to listen to this guy, see what you think." Bill comes out to my ranch. I had a ranch in Malibu. Bill comes out there with Bergans and, he was a carpenter, but he had a guitar and a big, thick notebook full of songs. So he comes and sits in the living room and starts singing, "Ain't no sunshine when she's gone." So he starts singing those songs. My wife wants me to play. It's not warm when she's away. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. And this house just ain't no home anytime she goes away. And I know, hey, all the little young thing on, 'cause ain't no sunshine when she's gone. So, thank you.
What was that like hearing that for the first time? I mean, we've hit I'm just trying to imagine.
Well, it was just
sitting
like,
at your ranch and
just like you're sitting there today.
Unloads that on you.
We're sitting there, and but he continues on though with other songs, Grandma's Hands, and it finally gets to the point where I'm like, "Okay, Bill, because I want to get on the phone, I want to get on the phone and call some people and bring them out and call the studio, and as soon as I could, because back in those days, you didn't have to have acquisitions, and you didn't have to have, work orders and stuff. You could just walk into a studio and, say, "Hey, look, I got something going here. I want to get some studio time," and they'd bill you later. Not anymore. But I called Al Jackson and Duck Dunn out from Memphis, and they came out, and I got Stephen Stills over, and we started recording. Yeah.
That's quite a record.
Thank you. We walked in, and Bill just wanted to get his song recorded. We got to the studio on Selma over there in Hollywood, and everything's set up, and the engineer got the sounds and things. Bill pulls me over into the control room and says, "Booker, who's going to sing these songs?" And I said, You are, Bill. That's a true story. So he went out there, and just like I told him, he sang the songs.
It's so amazing. And it's it's great it's interesting to hear you talk about being in one musical community in Memphis and then kind of the freedom of going to another musical community in California and how it's different and how you can do things in a different way. That's one example. What are some of the other really great music experiences that you had, kind of in that time in the 70s in LA? What are some sessions that you dug and things that you produced or that you wrote the songs for? What were some moments that were really meaningful to you?
Well, the moment that comes to mind, when I was a kid, the first time I walked into a recording studio in Los Angeles, I was called, this guy, Ahmet Erdogan, had a company, Atlantic Records, and his artist was Bobby Darin. So he calls my sister and asks if I can come over to the studio and play for Bobby Darin. And it's 1967, maybe, but the way they were doing it was so different from the way we did it in Memphis. We kind of lollygagged around, and kind of had a cup of coffee. But there, the session players were playing 3 sessions a day, and they were right on. So I walked into the studio. There's the Blossoms over there. There's 2 drummers. There's horn section. There's music on the stands. And you walk in, and you sit down, and the music is there in front of you. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, recording. Just like that. I'm like, whoa. Wait a minute. So that was my first Hollywood session. I was just undone. But I learned that you have to be on focus. You have to pay attention. You can't be daydreaming, And but that was the way they did it, and so that was a moment for me.
Another classic record that you produced? You mentioned Willie Nelson and produced Stardust.
Thank you.
How did that come about? Was that you met on the beach and put that record out?
Yeah, I rented an apartment. I had an apartment in Malibu on the beach, and just stepped out to get some air one day, and I had an upstairs apartment, and I saw a fellow running down the beach, long red hair, and I looked at him and said, "Oh, that looks like Willie Nelson." And he kept coming a little closer, and he turned into the entrance to the apartment, and it was Willie Nelson. And so it turned out he had the apartment directly below me. He was there. So, went out and introduced myself and started playing songs at night and kind of hanging out. He would come up and I'd go down. And the songs that we liked were the same, a lot of the same songs that we had used as younger men in clubs. So we started making a list of ones that we had in common. And those were the songs that ended up being the Stardust album. We went into his friend Emmylou Harris, his husband, had a studio out in the country, out in the country, Beverly Hills. Part of Beverly Hills is in the mountains, and they had a beautiful home with a recording studio. We pulled up an engineering truck and recorded that. That was completely different from the Bobby Darin session. That was relaxed and take your time, and it was Willie Nelson's.
One thing that I wanted to try to talk about a little bit, or get some of your insight on, is there's this great explosion, of R&B music in the kind of going really, I guess, from regional bands like Louis Jordan from the late 40s and into the 50s, and this progression from R&B into soul music and into funk and through the 70s, and then it just seems like there's this point by the mid to late 70s where all of this just kind of enters a vacuum, and artists start struggling getting gigs, and the 80s become just this totally different musicscape, and musicians like you and others that I've talked to, the work went away, and everything seems like it changed, and this continuum was disrupted. And I was just curious to hear your thoughts about what happened or why that might have happened, and because now there's this resurgence, and it's generational perhaps, but what happened in the late 70s and 80s?
There were very few bands that survived that era. Earth, Wind and Fire survived, but there were very few bands that were able to. Maybe the Gap Band survived, maybe only to a handful. Disco came in, the business changed, the business model changed. So there were a lot of musicians that fell by the wayside because they had been making their living as session players in Hollywood, New York, and those sessions weren't there anymore. The drum machine, the electronics came in, and some people got enamored of them and got swept away by the whole electronic. Not me, but a lot of people did. I did too. It's just, I had a drum machine on my first album actually in 1977 called The Runaway. It's just, it was the beginning of the digital age. And there were as many good things about it as there were bad things. So.
Is it just that it allowed people to do things on their own without the need of studio musicians, and it gave people kind of a different freedom, or just, I don't know, I'm just fascinated. It seemed like even at this point, you stop seeing bands playing music in bars, just everything really changes, and it's a totally different culture.
Motion picture studios found out that they could give one musician a small budget and come up with a score for a film because he could do it on his computer rather than hiring an orchestra. Clubs, could have a DJ instead of have a band, and it was a financial revolution also. So some of it was good and some of it was bad, I think. I don't know, maybe equal proportions.
Do you like hearing a live band or a good DJ?
Well, I prefer to have both. A good DJ with a live band.
Those are good too. Trying to think, what else do I have here for you? We've got questions from the audience. I don't have a clock, so I've just been doing this. I hope we're on a rhythm that's working for everybody here. Okay. I think those were basically all my questions anyway. So we'll go to questions that folks have asked.
If anybody has any, raise your hands.
Okay, well, I'll start with this one while we're wrestling some up. So who is the most memorable performer that you have worked with? Memorable, good or bad?
Okay, so I'll just openly go through, because my mind is going through so many people, everybody from Tom Jones to Barbara Streisand to Donovan, so many people I worked with. The most memorable, that's tough.
And you're pretty egalitarian too, so, you know.
Look, I had quite an experience with Jimmy Reed.
When was that?
It was one of my first gigs in New York City. And there was a DJ, his name was Magnificent Montague. We were at at a ballroom in New York City, had packed with people. Ruth Brown, Otis Redding, Jimmy Reed, and Booker T and the MGs. And Magnificent Montague left without paying Jimmy. And Jimmy had a pistol in his amp. And when he found out he wasn't getting paid, he went for that pistol. And it was a scary experience. But that was memorable. That was memorable.
Yeah, amps have that little space in the back behind the
does.
speakers where you can put a piece. I hadn't thought about that.
It does.
I hadn't thought about that.
It does. My bass player put $300 back there one time backstage because he forgot to get it out and then shipped the amp backstage and then landed in Memphis. And back then the porters would bring your luggage out to the curb to you. And he reached back there and got that $300 out the amp, and the porters were looking, oh my goodness. I know they checked every amp from then on. From then on.
Keep those guys busy. We have another one? All right.
Barbara Streisand was probably the most purposeful entertainer I've worked with. She was the first one on the set, and she was the last person to go home. She just really, really cared a lot about the music. We did some beautiful music for a song called Evergreen for A Star Is Born, and she was just a beautiful person to work with.
Very cool. Here's another that we have from the audience. What was your experience with knocking on heaven's door?
Mama, come take this badge from me. I can't wear it anymore. It's getting dark, too dark to see. I feel like I'm knocking on heaven's door. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. Yeah, I bought this ranch. Thank you. I bought this ranch in Malibu that had belonged to Lana Turner and had horses, a horse ranch. And across the street was the home of Bob Dylan. And he would come over to the ranch. I had a little tape recorder. Somehow I messed up one of the speakers on the tape recorder, caught fire or something. But when you plugged the guitar into it, it sounded like a fuzz tone. And Bob liked that. So he would come over. He'd come over and plug his guitar into my tape recorder. But he said, Booker, we're working on a movie over here with Sam Peckinpah. He was a big Sam Peckinpah fan, and Chris Christopherson. So grab your bass and come on out to the studio. It was early in the morning, the way I remember it. And, I wasn't too happy about it, but I got my bass and went out there, and that's what happened. He walked over to the microphone and started singing those words, and that way it was just so heartfelt to He's such a prolific songwriter, but also just an appropriate songwriter.
Yeah. Do we have more? Oh, this is great. Not that the other two weren't fantastic. That's not what I meant. What is one album you think everyone should listen to? Just one.
I have to say, the first album by Booker T and the MGs. Thank you. And I honestly am coming from the position of a fan. I really do feel that we hit on something special that time by accident or whatever, but the songs on that, the Green Onions, Behave Yourself, the Be My Lady, those, it's some of my favorite music. I would suggest it.
Somewhat recently remastered, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
On Stax. A few more. All right. How many more? How much? Do we have a timekeeper? Is there 5 times? Okay. Because I could do this for a while. So.
Thank you.
What current musicians do you find compelling?
Okay. I listen to a lot of stuff. I've listened to Charlie XCX. I like Alfie Bowie. I like the Drive-By Truckers. I still listen to concertos by Schumann and Tchaikovsky. There's a lot of music.
There's a whole lot. Almost too much, it seems like sometimes. It's
There's
hard to
a lot.
keep up.
There's a lot.
Should we do one more? The last question. Second to last. Oh, good. It's a good one. Tell us what you're working on now.
I'm deeply involved in writing a book about my life, my memoir. Thank you. And I've got my computer all set up to work on an EDM album. And I have a blank score set up to hopefully start writing either a viola or a cello concerto.
Very cool. What? Oh, they're furiously vetting questions.
Okay. Yeah.
What? This is from a girl who is 11.
Okay. A boy.
A boy. Sorry.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. I just what I've been told. Sorry. Okay. What would your reaction be if not me, young person in the crowd, said that I played a mashup on piano of Green Onions?
That's interesting. Wow. I'd be interested to hear it. Yeah. Good.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. You have such a calm presence. Do you meditate, or what is your practice to care for your body and mind? As I said earlier, people were commenting that you look fantastic as you were walking by the line earlier tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this is probably, I've meditated for about 40 years, hopefully every day. at least a few minutes. I've practiced a lot of different methods of meditation, but I always do something, and I think that attributes to some of the calmness that you see, hopefully that you see. But I am not a calm person by nature. But the meditation does calm you down.
Well, I think we'll close. Although we do have a couple, we have a couple things here. We have what we love to do when we bring people to Lawrence. No, actually, first I want to plug your concert, and then I'll do this. If you didn't see the posters just outside, Booker is going to be opening for Boz Scaggs on August 15th at the Uptown. So get your tickets. I'm very excited that you're coming back. So we're happy. So if you want to see much more of the small amount of music that we saw tonight, you'll have a very great opportunity to do that later this summer. What we also like to do when we have important guests here in town is we always like to give out a gold library card. So, and especially somebody, and you and Nan, your wife, are such wonderful supporters of libraries. This is a very special gold library card for Booker T. Jones. And so we want you to have this and think fondly of us. So I'll pass that along to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This means so much to me. Now don't take this the wrong way. I have the Santa Monica Library card. I have the Beverly Hills Library card. I have the Incline Village Library card. I have the West Hollywood Library card. I have the Bloomington, Indiana Library card. I am a lover of libraries. I have always been my whole life, and one of the saddest moments of my life was when the Cossack Library in Memphis was burned down. Yeah, that was just a terrible day. But I love libraries because I feel like I know what libraries mean to not just me, but to humanity. And I have to thank you for one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had today at the Lawrence Library. It meant so much to me to see the old and the young, and the experience, the energy that was being exchanged there today at that library. And when you told me the hours and how generous the hours were, it was. I think you're doing a great job. You have a beautiful building. You have a beautiful place there, and that's great work. So congratulations to you and your people.
It's a great town.
So I really appreciate this. Library cards are valuable things. A lot of people don't know you can do so many things. I know the value of this card because there are so many things that I will use, so many courses I'll take online from a long distance using this. But I want to take the opportunity to say thank you so much for having me here in Lawrence. It's been such a good experience for me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Do you want to play one last song?
Sure, sure.
I don't want to put you on the
Sure.
spot. That would be lovely.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say that. I just wanted to say we walked into the hotel and there were gifts there for us. There were beautiful water bottles and T-shirts, and it was such a nice feeling, such a nice room too at the beautiful hotel. So thank you for that too. I wanted to just maybe play one more song for you. Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting when evening comes, watching the ships roll in, and I watch them roll away again. Yeah, I'm just sitting on dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. Sitting on dock of the bay, wasting time. I left my home in Georgia, headed for the Frisco Bay. Now I have nothing to live for, and it looks like nothing gonna come my way. So I'm just sitting on dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. Sitting on dock of the bay, wasting time. Looks like nothing's gonna change. Everything still remains the same. I can't do what 6 people tell me to, so I guess I'll remain the same. Sitting here resting my bones, and this loneliness won't leave me alone. Sitting here resting my bones. Sitting on dock of the bay, wasting time. One more time. Yeah. That was fun. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, I had a great time. Thank you. Thanks for coming.